Hello, everyone, and welcome to Help Me Process, a weekly-ish casual video memo series of an external processor. That's me attempting to make sense of her experiences. So I want to talk about. I want to process out this phrase or word Latinx. So if you're not familiar, it is a gender neutral way of talking about folks who connect to the Latino community, but wanting to identify with a gender nonconforming kind of way of describing themselves. So if you're familiar with the Spanish language, it describes different gender, male and female, two different words that really don't even need gender. But some folks who may see themselves as gender nonconforming or trans or other identities might not feel like the language really adequately includes them. So it doesn't necessarily work for them. And so it's really at this intersection of race and gender that Latinx is kind of pushing the boundaries and kind of fitting itself in there. So people are essentially wanting to make themselves visible in a language that may feel like is not making them visible or erases them in certain kinds of ways. So, and recently, in the last couple of workshops I've done, I've had some pushback around folks who identify as Latino or Latina and find Latinx offensive. And I was a little confused by this. Now, I admit I am an African American woman. I do not identify as Latina. I am cis, I am heterosexual, so I'm more so using that language as someone who's acknowledging different ways in which people consider gender. But I have this pushback, and I found it to be a little confusing. So, because one, the folks that have done this pushback, I wonder if they know the history of folks who have utilized black and brown people who have utilized the language of the colonizer, whoever colonized them or whoever enslaved them, use this term as a way of asserting themselves. Um, I don't know if they do, if they don't, or if it matters to them. I don't know. I also wonder if the folks who are pushing back are cis. So people who agree with the gender assigned to them at birth. So they're not necessarily in this struggle or find themselves in connection to people who are asserting a different gender identity that's outside of the male female binary. Um, because what it makes me think of is the way in which African folks and essentially African folks who have been utilizing whatever the oppressor's language is to do what they want to do, right? So when you think of Jamaica, black people are not indigenous to Jamaica. They were brought there from Africa, and so they were forced to speak English. So they mixed their African languages and tones with British English, and here you get Jamaican patois. Haitian people, like, black people are not indigenous to Haiti. So they took their African languages and their French that was forced upon them by their enslavers, and here you get Haitian Creole. You have same thing that happened here in the United States, where you had Africans who were brought here and forced to speak British English, and we mixed our own language and tones, and we get African American vernacular English. The pejorative term is Ebonics. Don't use that term. But it has its own rules and ways in which it's shared. So language evolves. And so when I think about Spanish, it's like Spanish is essentially people who are Latino or Latina or Latinx are essentially indigenous folks who were forced to speak Spanish. Like, many of these people and folks in like Puerto Rico, in Dominican Republic, and anywhere in Central and South America where anybody that speaks Spanish outside of Spain were enslaved or colonized folks who were forced to speak the oppressor's language. It's the only reason they're speaking it, right? And so I found it very interesting for one person who particularly was very passionate about like upholding the Spanish language. And I'm just kind of like that's like a like you get to play with that language because your oppressor gave you that language, right? In the same way that like we get to play with English in certain kinds of ways, right? And I recognize that there's a bias. I have my bias in that way, really thinking about the creativity of people of color to express themselves. And so I find it I guess I'm unclear as to the reason in which some people may feel offended. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be. I recognize this is not an identity I have. I feel I love Latinx more so because of my connection to other Black people globally and locally in way we've the work that we've done with language. And so it's similar to, let's say, Alice Walker using womanism, who spelled with a Y instead of an E, for what the where men is, as a way to assert like race in the feminist struggle, and saying that feminism, the way it is often seen, is very much grounded in middle class white women, and saying that meanwhile, y'all asking for the right to work. Black women and indigenous women, we've been working. We're not asking for that right. We need some other stuff going on. So we've been doing that. Our woman neck, or using spelling woman with an X. So I'm just interested in your thoughts. Like, have you had some questions around Latinx? Like, have you have some thoughts around that, or do you have any examples of way in which maybe people of your culture or your group who've utilized whatever the colonizers' language is, like in Brazil, colonized language is Portuguese, wherever there's a place where your people had to speak a language that's connected to Europe, and you're not in Europe, then that's a good chance that's the country or the imperial power that oppressed whatever your group was. So I'm curious, like, do you have any examples? What are your thoughts? And I'm still processing this, so help me out. I'll see you all next time.